When it comes to key verses, you can't get any, this won't be proper grammar, keyer, than the key verse we're getting ready to look at. And the reason I know this is the most ultimate key verse of the Bible, or should I say passage, is because Jesus said it was. And so I figure I stand on pretty good ground when I say this is the most central verse that we need to understand and practice in our Christianity. In fact, if we, any of our attendants tonight, this morning, any other time, don't make it to heaven, it will be because ultimately of failure to adequately, appropriately understand and implement this verse. Let's take a moment and just read through it. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind." I know you've heard that quoted many, many times. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And notice verse 40. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. That verse 40 is quite significant, isn't it? On these two. It all hangs right there. Your whole success in the Christian pursuit ultimately boils down to getting these two commands right. Now, we sing about this command a lot. I stopped at 277 because I ran out of page room on the slide. So I figured, well, I can get smaller print and get more song numbers up there, or I can just leave it at that one. So what I did was I just took the songbook and just started flipping through there, looking for songs where we sing about our love for God. Now, if you do the same little exercise and do it, you'll find there's a couple I didn't mention because we don't sing them a lot here. But if you have much of a memory at all, as you look at that list of songs, you'll recall singing some of those songs, and some of them not too long ago. And so we take our songs and we profess our love for God, and the singing part is pleasant, it's enjoyable, it's usually uplifting, and it's the easy part, isn't it? It's the loving God when you take it to the practical daily level that gets so tough. Let me give you an example over out of Ephesians chapter 6, which gets you into the practical part of taking what we saw 2 slides ago here. Well, let me go back this way a second. I guess I won't go back. There we go. Taking this one, which is real easy to read, and getting it to implement in this one. This is tough. Is it bondservants? Be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart, as to Christ. Now that gets us back to the Matthew passage. As to Christ. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but bondservants of Christ. There, now we're back in that love the Lord your God with all your heart business. Doing the will of God from the heart, with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. So when we're back there in Matthew looking at love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your strength, your soul, your ability, everything you got, and you say, okay, and I can sing about it, okay. Now he says, now tomorrow when you go to work Monday morning, or whatever your schedule happens to be, now I want you to practice it. Ow, now that gets tough. That gets to be the hard part. We have a little saying, we say talk is cheap. And talk is cheap. Talk is real easy to come up with. It's real easy to say the right thing. Most of us are pretty smart folks, and we know how to say the right thing at the right time and not goof up too often. Now, we do goof up now and then, because anytime you use 10,000 plus words a day, which is the lower average for folks using words, you're going to mess up a little bit. There's just no way somebody can say the right words 100% of the time. But for the most part, we know how to do that. And so what God is looking for is not for us to say the right word. He's looking for the practice. He's looking for the behavior. You know, somebody might say, don't tell me you love me, show me that you love me. And that's exactly what God did in John 3:16. For God so loved the world. So when God wanted to show us His love, He didn't just sit up in heaven and holler, hey, I love you. He said, now let me show you. And so He demonstrated His own love towards us in that while we were still sinners, He sent Christ to die for us. Now, I highlighted a couple of things up here because I want you to take note of that. You know, we're not really big on the Greek. I don't know Greek. The only 2 Greek words I know, maybe 3, has to do with baptizo, agape, which you're looking at, and then Hades, Tartarus, those words that relate to hell. And then I'm about out of Greek there. I don't know much beyond that. And I'm pretty certain you don't know much beyond that. But it is interesting to notice that when He tells us to love the Lord our God with all our heart, it's the same word He gave us when He told us in John 3:16 that He so loved the world. Now, if you have a computer program, doing this kind of study gets real easy. If you don't have a good Bible computer program, I've got one that's a freebie. I'm not saying it's really the best one out there, but it is free, and you can do these kind of little studies without any problem. All I've got to do is burn you a disk and let you download it to your computer, so not that big of a deal. So what we see here then is God's love for us demonstrated by His behavior towards us, and what we know He's looking for is not just talk, but what He's looking for is action. He's looking for behavior. He's looking for that really flows from the heart. Now you come up with definitions for love. You can find all kinds of definitions all over the place. This is the one I came across, just an author somewhere I was reading. He said, hey, this is love. And I thought, well, that's clever. That'll work. I'm not saying this is the only definition. I'm just saying it'll work. And we're going to tie some Bible verses to it here in a moment, because where we want to go is back to that book, chapter and verse foundation. This is not an inspired definition. This is some man's idea of what love is when we're talking about God. I think it's appropriate. I think when we tie the verses to it, it's very, very appropriate. So this author said it's devoting your affections, thoughts, will, and strength to do the things that delight God. Delight God. We're making God smile, in a matter of speaking. I guess that's probably not too inappropriate, because it says the angels rejoice when a lost one comes home. That's a paraphrase, but it's close enough. So if the angels rejoice, I wonder where they got their ability to rejoice. I have an idea God rejoices too. And so when we do those things that delight God, that is going to fall within the biblical definition of love. So we're going to take affections, thoughts, will, and strength, and we're going to tie a verse to each one of those four aspects, because I think it's appropriate. So under affections, I thought, how about 1 John 2:15? Now, you could think of another verse, but I think John 2:15 is a good one. He says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So where does God want our love to reside? Where does He want that to abound? He said, well, not in the world, obviously. That's not the place He wants us to focus our love, but rather He wants us to focus our love on heaven above, on the Father, seeking first the kingdom of heaven, or setting your mind on things above, Colossians 3 and verse 1 and 2 there. There'd be a variety of verses you could use. But our affections, our desires, it's to be the opposite of Lot's wife. Lot's wife, as we said here a month or so ago in a lesson, she was physically moving the right direction, no question about it. She had a little problem with wanting to go back though, didn't she? And so she looked back over her shoulder, longing for the good old days or whatever was in her mind. And God said, no, I told you not to look back. Or as Christ said, once you put your hand to the plow and you look back, you're not fit for the kingdom of heaven. And so affections, don't love the things of the world. Then our thoughts. I thought of 2 Corinthians 10 and 5. I had to double look at that. I thought that said 15 for a second. It is 2 Corinthians 10:5, where he tells us we bring every thought in captivity to obedience of Christ, which is the depth, the extent, the extreme we go to in order to become the disciple that God wants us to be. Taking every thought and recognizing, no, I don't need to be thinking that. I'm taking it captive. How do you do that? That's tough, isn't it? If I tell you not to think of a purple elephant, what are you thinking about right now? I told you not to think about a purple elephant. Quit it. But now what are you're still thinking about a purple? You can't help it. You got to replace it with something, because you can't have this vacuum in your head. And so when you come to a thought that you need to take captive, you need to have a gimmick to replace that thought with. I don't care if you start humming Amazing Grace or start singing Amazing Grace to the top of your lungs, depending on where you're at. That could be embarrassing. Maybe you start praying. Maybe you whisper a prayer. Maybe you find you a quiet place. But you need something, somehow, some way, where you say, I don't need to be thinking about that. That's not appropriate. And now I'm going to think about the 23rd Psalm, or Psalm 101, or Psalm 15. Just whatever works for you. But you got to take that one out, and you got to stick something new there. Now, it could be something else. It could be something, as we would say, is secular. You could be thinking, well, I don't need to be thinking about that. I need to be thinking about this car I'm working on. Or I need to think about this project I'm working on. Or I need to think about this letter I'm writing. Thing is, to take a thought captive, you've got to have something to replace the negative thought with. That's the key trick to doing that. Now, it says your will. Devoting our affections, thoughts, will to His strength. I thought of Ecclesiastes 12 and 13. Because this is the whole matter. This is the whole of man, to fear God and keep His commandments. If that's not our will, I don't know what else to put in that slot there. That would be my number one go-to verse. And then finally, He said our strength. I'll use Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. There's a good definition of love, isn't it? So we take our affections and our thoughts and our will and our strength, and we focus them in upon the things that God has designed for us, the things He's assigned to us, ultimately Calvary being the greatest example of giving oneself up for God. But now there's another way to look at love. I have a sign that's been hanging in my office for a long, long time. Sometimes we tease about it, but it says love is spelled T-I-M-E. Time. Kids instinctively know that parents and grandparents spend their time where their heart is. Now, I know sometimes parents get busy and can't always spend the time with their children they want, but kids don't know how to articulate all those things. So children just know mom and daddy or adults spend their time where their heart is. There's a lot of truth to that. We generally have time for what really, really matters to us. Now, I know there are exceptions, but as a general rule, we do. And so we need to talk about time for a minute, because what is time other than our life, the very living of our life. Right now, for this hour that you've been here, for the deacons and elders, for this almost 2 hours that you've been here now, you are doing exactly what time element would require. You're investing it, spending it in the pursuit of the work of God, doing the things that God wants done. When you sit and study your Bible, obviously you're spending time with God. Time in prayer, time with God. You go to the Whitehall Nursing Home and visit Edna and Miss Britt and Sister Jennings, that's all counts. That's time. It's taking your life and investing it in the things that are important to God. When you do those things, when you take the time to make a card or a call, as the couple of thank you notes said that we read in the announcements, when you take that time, God smiles and says, yeah, that's my kid, look. He's doing the right thing. She's doing the right thing. It's all those little things where you could be watching something on TV, you could be pursuing your own interest, you could be doing whatever it is people do, but you chose instead to do the things that are consistent with the will of God. That's love. That's time. That's presenting your body a living sacrifice. I could be doing other things with my body right now, but I've decided to do this with my body because it's part of my affection, my will, my thoughts, my strength, and it brings pleasure, delight to my Father in heaven. We could use John 15:13. No one has greater love has no one than this than to lay down his life for his friends. Well, we're probably not going to be called upon to die. I'm fairly certain of that. If it happens, we'll be shocked in the process, won't we? But I lay down portions of my life, and you lay down portions of your life too. Obviously, we're not talking about death here, but when you have 30 minutes that you give to a family, an hour that you give to a family, whether it's a time of rejoicing, Romans 12:15 says, weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. You take 2 or 3 hours of your morning and you sit with a family who's got a loved one in intensive care, you laid down part of your life. Oh, not in the exact way this verse is talking about. I know I'm playing on words here, but you still laid down part of your life. And Christ says, greater love has this, no man, than to lay down his... You never get that time back. I don't care if it's 15 minutes or all day sometime. You never, ever get that back. Once you invest it, expend it towards somebody's good, it's gone. But if you invest it or expend it toward their bad, their ill will, it's gone. But here we get a way that we practice the love of God and the love of neighbors by laying down portions of our life, moments of our life, whether it's 10 minutes or 15 or a few hours here or there. That's one of the things that we do. Now, here's one of the other things we do. We're going to kind of flip pages on you, turn direction a little bit. Sometimes we trick ourselves. And we tell ourselves how good we really are when we aren't as good as we think we are. Now, we may be sincere in our assessment, and we don't find out until things really get tough. Here, the apostles, I think, were sincere. They're at the Last Supper, and Christ said, you're all going to be made to stumble because of me. And Peter stands up, and he says, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. Are you kind of chuckling at that one? Because you know what he did, right? You know, and the verse to follow says, and so said all the disciples. So all 11 of them there, maybe Judas at the time, I'll have to go back and examine that a little closer, but all the disciples are sitting there going, we'll never deny you. We'll never turn our back on you. Where are they just an hour or two later? Well, 10 of them scattered so far away, we don't know where they are. And Peter's hanging out in the court trying to pretend like he's not one of them. But his curiosity won't let him wander too far away. What happened? Were they lying? I don't think so. Were they just, trying to flatter Christ? I don't think so. I think what happened, I think when they said this, I think they were absolutely sincere. I think they thought for certain at that moment when they were saying it, if we got to die, we're going to die. We love you that much. And then when it really came around and it looked like they might have to die, they said, well, we need to think about this again. And they scattered and they went running. Why does that happen? I think Jeremiah 17:9 helps us understand why that happens. It's because the heart is desperately wicked. What does he say here? He says, it is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? How many times has a man or a woman said to his sweetheart, their bride, especially when he's trying to get her to put that ring on a finger and be his or hers forever and ever. And, oh, honey, I'll never do you wrong. I'll never cheat you. I'll never upset you. I'll never, 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 never. How many married couples have got through too many years of life without some rough spots in their relationship? Is it that the guy or the woman lied? No. It's that our heart just sometimes is desperately wicked and deceitful. It's so easy to say the right thing and maybe really mean it, but the follow-through is where the challenge comes in. So the apostles are saying to Christ, we're going to die with you, just not tonight. And so they find out where their heart really is. And the same thing happens to you and I. We go back to Matthew and we say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, all your strength. We go, yeah, that's me. And then a temptation comes along at work, maybe in a relationship, maybe in a social situation. And now we find out if that love is as strong as what, it really takes. We say, I'm going to stand alone with Jesus. And then all of a sudden we get kind of the spotlight shining on us, and we don't really want to stand alone with Jesus. The thing about this that we must understand is there's no way to hide it from God. As you're looking at Psalms 139, verse 2 through 4, He already knows what we're thinking. He already comprehends our path, our lying down. There's not a word on our tongue. Behold, the Lord knows it altogether. He already knows what's happening. So the trick is to look at our hearts with such, I'm going to say brutal honesty, to where we see what God sees in our hearts. Not what I hope others see in my heart, not what I would like to see in my heart, but from God's perspective as He sits on His throne in heaven and looks down in our individual hearts and sees the reality of what's theirs regardless of what we say. Because when He sat in heaven and Peter said, even if I have to die with you, now that's what Peter thought was in his heart. But God said, that's not what's in your heart. God saw Peter coming and his denial. Isn't that what Christ said? Before the cock crows thrice, you'll deny me 3 times, or something along that line. To kind of mess that one up, but you get the idea. God knew what was really in his heart, even though he hadn't accepted it yet. One of the things I try to teach folks when it comes to confession is it doesn't matter what you confess to God. You're not going to shock Him. He already knows. He knows every detail in your heart. He knows every secret little thought that you ever had in your heart. The only person we're really trying to get to see it is you, so that you can deal with it. Now, it's back to the old thing that as long as you're in denial, you can't deal with it. So you got to put it on the table and say, this is my sin. And then when we can deal with it, then we can actually move forward, get some traction and deal with things. Otherwise, God knows what's in our heart. And if we regard iniquity in our heart, He's not going to hear us. He's not going to listen to us, because He's looking for a heart that is totally dedicated, devoted, and committed to pursuing His way. And on that's where the whole law hangs. And like I said in the introduction, if we don't make it to heaven, chances are ultimately it is because we messed up here somewhere. The idea of getting the heart right was always from the beginning. The Pharisees messed it up. See, the Pharisees got all physical. The Pharisees said, well, if I don't do it physically, it doesn't matter what I'm thinking because I'm not actually doing anything. But Christ said the other way around. He said, if you look at a woman and lust after her, you've already committed adultery in your heart. That's Matthew 5:28. And that principle is there. If you're looking at the armored car going by going, boy, I wish I could rob that thing. And it's not just a joke, but you're seriously trying to figure out how to rob it, you're already guilty of sin, because Christians don't think that kind of thing. That's not new with the New Testament. God was always trying to get to the heart. They just really messed it up over the generations. Notice now we're going to read the first 2 verses, which is basically what Christ said. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in His ways, to love Him, to serve the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, to keep the commandments of the Lord and His statutes, which I command you today for your good. Now I'm dropping down to verse 16, so please do take note that I jumped verse 14 and 15. He said, therefore circumcise the foreskin of your heart, and be stiff-necked no longer. This whole idea of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, it always got back to the heart. But the Pharisees goofed it all up. Well, before the Pharisees. They were messing it up way, way back then, before the Pharisees ever came along. But it was always aimed at getting the heart right with God. That's why David talked about Psalms 139. He already sees what's in my heart. Or when he said, if I regard iniquity in my heart. You see, that's where God was always looking. And of course, in the New Testament, I think it's a little easier to see and focus on the heart. And that's what the love is. If the heart's not right, we're in a whole lot of trouble. That's what we got to get to. Now, we're going to take a minute, run 4 or 5 things that could compete with the heart. The love of God, I should say. We're going to start with money. There's no need to elaborate just real long on that. You know, a lot of folks live their whole life about the mighty dollar. It's going to sound a little cynical, but you know, that's the way the world runs. It's all about the bottom line. There are not too many folks out there, you are the exception, who don't count the bottom line first. Most people, it's about the dollar. And it's about getting your dollars, really what it's about. You got money, I want it, you know. And they'll devise any way they can to get your money. That's how the world generally runs. That's not right. As he says here, the love of money. It's not that you got money, that's fine. But when you got the love of money, now you got a competing conflict here. And you can't love money and God both. Or as Christ would say in Matthew 6, I think it starts verse 19, you can't love God and mammon both. You got to pick one, because you're going to love the one and hate the other. So you got to figure out which one do I really want. Now, the thing is, we can't look at anybody and tell which one they really want. You could have somebody who had very little money who loved money, and somebody who had a whole lot of money and didn't love money. Or you could have the reverse situation. Somebody who had a whole lot of money and loved it. than somebody who didn't have much and didn't know it. It's all individual thing. But you can't let the money compete, yet you got to be a responsible steward at the same time. It gets a little tricky, doesn't it? How about the love of approval, validation, praise, or whatever you want to call it? Nevertheless, even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Now, you notice two things here. Nothing wrong with money, nothing wrong with approval. The thing that happened was they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. You see, that's the whole thing we're dealing with here. God says, I want to be your number one. I want you to love me with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, all your being, everything you got inside of you. I want you to love me. Now, you're going to have some money, sure. You're going to have some approval and friends that pat you on the back, sure. But I want you to look at those things as secondary, if not even less, and keep your focus on things in heaven and keep them your priority. And so we get our approval, our praise of men. There's nothing wrong with that until we get it backwards and start loving it more than other things. Now we're back to the love of the world. We had verse 2:15 at the beginning of the lesson. Do not love the world, the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. That's pretty blunt. For all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but it's the world. Now think about that a second. Lust of the flesh. Anything you can consume, let's say with your five senses basically. What happens at the tombstone? You let go of it all, don't you? I mean, you can have a big party all the way to the tombstone, but once you hit the tombstone, or whenever age takes life away from you, and you no longer can do the things you used to do, it's over. Lust of the flesh, it's passing away. Lust of the eyes, I don't know exactly what you want to put in that. Let's call it eye candy and things that excite the eye and what have you. It's going too. Eventually it's gone. And then the pride of life, those things people get puffed up about. You know, it's all kinds of crazy things, you know. Some people are all proud about the college they graduated from, like that really makes a difference. Some people are really glad from the family line they come from, like their family line's better than somebody else's family line. Some people are all proud about their race, you know. Some people are proud about their finances. Some of them are proud about their house. They're, you know, just go through all the things people get proud about. God says it's going away. You're not keeping any of it. Now, there's nothing wrong with having the things that we're talking about. It's the competing love. It's another lust of the flesh. You know, I like certain foods pretty well. Now, you might call that a lust of the flesh. If it becomes gluttony, it is a lust of the flesh. But we got to eat something, or then it's called self-starvation, and that's not right either, right? Lust of the eyes. You got to see things, and there's some things I see that delight my eye pretty quick. Basically, grandchildren, if you know what I'm talking about. But now, the point is, though, you know, you can't say, well, that's all sin. No, it's not all sin. It's not wrong that there are things that you delight in. You reel in a big 8-pound bass in, you better be taking some pictures and putting it on Facebook. That's a delight to the eye. If I ever get that big Boone and Crockett buck, that ain't happening. If I ever do, you can be guaranteed it's going to be all over Facebook. Now, is that wrong? No. Until those things, whether it's grandkids, family, friends, sports, or whatever, become more important than God. And he said, don't love those things. Don't love them in a way that they can compete with God's love, because the world's passing away and the lust thereof it. And he who does the will of God, that's the one that abides forever. So we're back to kind of keeping a balance here, because we don't want to take people out of life. We're not into living the reclusive life of a hermit or something. Matthew 10:37, if you love father and mother more than me, you're not worthy of him. If you love son or daughter more than him, you're not worthy of him. Again, he's not saying you can't love your mama. In fact, he would say you got to honor your mother and father, right? So what he's saying is he's more important. And some of us have made that decision. Some of us have parents who are not faithful to Christ. Some of us have parents that are in denominationalism. Some people of us have parents that are just outright in corruption, in immorality, in various worldly lives. Maybe not bank robbers, but you know what I'm saying. We still love them. But we can't let their influence come over Christ and take over that position. Revelation 12:11, finally your life. These people overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. You know, dying for Christ. This is a tough thought, isn't it? I still don't think I'm going to see it. Now, with the way Islam's rolling around and what have you, I'm curious how to unfold. Lord, give me another 20 years. I think I'll see some things I don't want to see. But I think the next generation down, my kids, my grandkids, I think they could really see some really, really ugly things that some third world country people do experience in this current age. How much do you love your life? Are you willing to give it up? You know, and of course, the verse you want to ask yourself in connection with that, Christ said, he who is faithful in little will be faithful in much. He who is unfaithful in what is least will also be unfaithful in much. So if I can't be faithful in a little bit of stuff, then how can I be faithful in a lot of stuff? Now, you're the Sunday night crowd, so you're the good crowd, but you'll notice we had 108 here this morning. I'm going to guess we got roughly 75 here tonight. That means there's some 30 plus people not here tonight. We'll be kind and say, well, a couple of them had to work, and we don't get too picky about that. And some may be sick. We do know that some are out sick, but those who would rather be home watching TV instead of learning how to get closer to God, if they can't be faithful in what's little, if things do get really ugly and nasty with Islam or something else, how will they ever be faithful in what's much? Oh, it's easy to say it, just like Peter did. Well, we'll die if we got to die. No problem. Until the heat actually comes up and you're really facing the event. And then they're doing what everybody else does. They're scattering like sheep. Let's run these 4 verses. Let's run these 4 verses and we'll close the lesson. These are our standard love verses out of John 14, the first 3, and the last one's out of John 15. And if you don't mind writing in your Bible, circling these verses in your Bible is an easy way to keep up with them. I can easily remember John 14 and chapter 15, but I don't usually remember all the verses. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's what love is. It's that selfless devotion, that total dedication to the will of God. Who has my commandments and keeps them, it is he who loves me. Now notice I put the little A there. What I'm telling you is I didn't use the whole verse. I just used that little part of the verse, as I did with the next verse, 23a. Jesus answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, will keep my word. That word keep, it's not just, like I got it in my pocket. It's attention to it. It's a treasuring, a keeping the North Star when you're traveling the seas kind of thing. Keeping the point on the compass. It's a traveling term where I'm going someplace and I got to keep the course. It's staying on target. It's that kind of keep. Not just, well, I got a Bible. What else you want me to do? Well, it's the practice, the living of it. And finally, verse 14 of chapter 15. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. Isn't that amazing? That's love. Now, as I said in the opening, if any of us don't make it to heaven, ultimately, what it boils down to is we didn't get that love thing right. Because once we get the 2 love things right, to love God with everything we got and love our neighbor as ourselves, everything else pretty much going to flow out the way it ought to. Though here we have that key, that core. I guess I have just one question left. He says, you're my friend if you do whatever I command you. Are you his friend? If you are, stay the course. If you're not, it's time to make a change.